I was in a really awful state. I was really in a bad state.
Well,
and I thought, I can go to the gym. I can go for a run every day. I can take drugs. But
it's not enough.
I can't just do this. So, to carve out that space to say, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to feel shitty for a good part of the day. I do have to do this paperwork. I'm going to sit here and do this paperwork for an hour a day, come hell or high water.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Alena. And yes, it is the same show as Aha Moments with Alena, but we have changed the name, so you have tuned into the right place. And today, I'm so glad you're here because I have Tina Chadda. Now, Tina Chadda is from Toronto, Canada, and she is a good friend, but also a phenomenal person. She's an award-winning psychiatrist and an expert in psychosomatic and psychotherapy, I should say, and also an expert of mindfulness and meditation. The book that I know best of hers is The Heart That Heals Itself, but she has also written another book. She has a cookbook coming out, The Mindfulness of Eating. What is the title of that book that's coming out?
Recipes from My Kitchen in Wilhelmina.
Okay, I like that. That's much more fun. She's also a founding member of the Institute of Coaching Professional Associates of Harvard Medical School. She is very accredited, very well respected, but I know her as a wonderful friend, a mother of 4 children, and just a delightful person. And I would like you to welcome her for me. I am going to have her read her favorite quotes. We always start out with quotes. So she has 2, and I would like you to just listen in. Hi.
Hi.
All right. So why don't you read the quote, and then I'd love to know why.
Sure. I don't have them written down. I'm just saying them from memory.
Fantastic.
Virginia Woolf's quote, "Arrange whatever pieces come your way."
Ooh. I like that.
I love that quote.
And
my other favorite quote is by Winston Churchill. "Success is going from one obstacle to the next."
Oh, yeah.
He also said, when you're walking through hell, just keep going.
Yeah.
So maybe he wrote them at the same time.
Well, I like both of those. He probably did. I wonder where those came from. But they are very applicable to my life, and I'm sure yours too.
To everyone's life.
Everyone's life. Yeah, that's all right. Now, we do format this show just like it was named Aha Moments. And so what I like to move into is your aha moment or your many aha moments that have led you to where you are now. Do you have any?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I had a major moment, as you know.
I do.
A handful of years ago. It was actually on Valentine's Day when my house blew up in a gas explosion.
Wow.
And my neighbor and dear friend died in the accident. And I was rescued from my house with 2 of my youngest children that day. And I stood outside on the sidewalk and I watched my house disappear right in front of my eyes.
Oh.
And that was what we might call an aha moment. It was certainly a life-changing moment for me.
That is a humongous life-changing moment. Yes. Yeah.
And it led to a series of those kinds of moments for me, points of self-discovery and self-learning and transformation.
Well, not that I want to delve into that incident, but how was that incident you turned it into a positive, saying it's an aha moment, than just saying I was totally lost. But how did that instead you become something that moved you forward?
Well, I think that, Alena, right there is the point. One of the major points is that I learned how to use that experience of deep loss and tragedy as something that I could use in a positive way in my life.
Very important concept.
Yes, I think we all have experiences that are devastating in our life.
I'm
and
sure
that's
we
the
do.
nature of life. Trauma is an inherent nature of existence.
Yes, it is.
And then we can either get fixated on that and get into a negative state like depression, anxiety, even traumatic states, or we can decide unconsciously and consciously to use those as moments of transformation and incredible personal growth.
Yes.
And as a psychiatrist, you know, with my areas of psychotherapy and psychosomatics, I did a lot of research on my own, not because of my academic training, but because of my personal experience. I really became very fascinated with this topic. I was concerned not only obviously for myself, but for my family, my children in particular, as to how I could prevent this from becoming a major trauma for them.
Okay.
You know, and traditional therapy and traditional psychiatry is really focused on trauma. There's always the study of traumatology and loss. And just very recently in the academic literature, there's been more research done on what's called post-traumatic growth. So I became very, very interested in that.
Yes.
Yes, and I also became very interested in mindfulness and meditation, as well as positive psychology.
Is that what? The mindfulness, the meditation, and is that what you used to get yourself into a more positive frame so that you could move forward? Or is that a process that you learned because you were on your way? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes. You know, I used a whole range of techniques and therapies to help myself.
Like?
I returned to traditional therapy. Okay. I did my own therapy and psychoanalysis as a student because you are required to do that if you're going to become a psychiatrist yourself and conduct a practice in psychotherapy. Okay. So that was something I recognized that I needed to return to in order to help myself as best as possible. Good. Traditional therapy, as Freud talked about, is designed to deal with very negative states and to get you to kind of ground level, the base experience, the base emotions that we have. We work through those and get ourselves out of the basement. And even Freud said that psychoanalysis and psychotherapy was never really designed to treat everyday unhappiness. So that's kind of where I was. I got myself out of the doldrums of deep anxiety, depression, panic, having lost my house and having to deal with some major issues with the insurance company and the circumstances around the loss of my house and property. And I became fascinated with all the techniques that I could use to actually elevate myself, to make myself a better person. Good. So all of these were very recent and new movements that were happening. They weren't really part of traditional academic psychiatry or traditional things that I would have known as a doctor. And I started learning about all of those schools of thought, and now they're becoming much more mainstream, and I really have come to value those ways of learning and being, and I incorporate that now into my practice and my everyday life.
Oh, wonderful. And how have you seen it change your practice? I mean, how do the clients react to it? Is it beneficial? Do they really grab onto it easily, or do they?
Well, some people do. Again, you know, different things work for different people, and you want to make it's like a recipe. You want to kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that will give you the best outcome. So that's the kind of philosophy that we need to take with ourselves in order to experience a state of well-being and wellness. We want to, it might be going for a run every day. It might be making sure you're eating well. It could be doing a bit of yoga, some meditation.
Okay, well, I want to take us back a little bit because we're all presented with transforming situations, transitional, I should say, to keep with the lingo. We're all presented with transitions in our lives. Not everyone will say, all right, I have got to move forward. I've got to accept as it is and move forward. Many people will stay.
But there, Alena, I just want to insert there.
Yeah.
You know, as human beings, we're driven naturally towards progress. We're naturally driven towards the light. we're naturally designed for success. So I just want to say that.
Yes.
You know, it's important that we know that we're built that way. We're built for survival, and we're built for thriving.
We are.
And all the new neuroscience research now shows us that actually happiness is our natural default state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to be neutral or bland or depressed is not a natural state of being. So maybe we needed all this research to say to us, look, you know what, our natural default state is actually one of happiness. Isn't that amazing?
That amazing? That is amazing.
But it just goes hand in hand with that. We are built for being really great.
Oh, how awesome. Isn't that cool? Yeah, and it's true. I believe it
forget
totally.
that.
I don't hear it very often from other people.
We totally forget it.
We do totally forget it.
We do.
I also think it's nice that we're starting to not say, all right, it's normal to be sad or unhappy or do things that don't make you happy.
Well, that's it, because for instance, again, as a psychiatrist, I have lots of people, lots of patients who'll say, well, it's normal to be stressed, isn't it?
No.
Like, stress is normal. My stress is normal, and we'll talk about that, and we'll say, well, maybe it's not.
That's
our
right.
natural state is one of feeling good. It's a state of well-being.
It is.
It's not normal to feel hyper and anxious and,
No, it's
so
not
we're doing
normal.
something that maybe inadvertently we're doing something that's not so good for the self.
And if we're doing things good for ourselves and we are happy, just imagine how it would change the world.
Absolutely.
And
so that's where we go from surviving to thriving to flourishing. So we understand that is how we exist on a spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's how we live and how we can exist on that spectrum, from surviving to thriving to flourishing. There are simple things that you can do to get yourself to move along that spectrum,
Why don't you talk a little bit about those? Why don't you talk about that?
Well, I think mindfulness has been such a useful concept now, and it's taken off in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, we can all incorporate some very simple mindfulness techniques into our life. So, things are always most effective when we have it as a way of being, but sometimes you can just incorporate a few techniques, and that can do wonders as well. So, for instance, we talked earlier when we were doing the other segments about the mindful awareness of the self, of dealing with yourself. The fundamental human struggle is how to cope with oneself.
All the good and the bad.
The good and the bad. Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental question we are always dealing with. We're grappling with the duality. Good, bad, shameful, not shameful.
Angel, devil.
Yeah, love, unlove. Mm-hmm. So that fundamental thing. Mm-hmm. And just to simply say that we all struggle with that. Sure. To not think that you're different or that you're alone. Right. It could be your fear. It could be your anxiety, your depression. But just to say, okay, let yourself experience whatever you're experiencing.
And don't
to
label it.
Name it to tame it.
Well,
it's very simple things. We don't have to shut ourselves down. If we feel like we're just surviving, then it means that you're shutting yourself down all the time.
Exactly.
It's a state of shutdown. So when we simply say, all right, here, I don't feel so great today. Or I am feeling joy. I notice the sun there, and that makes me feel good. So you name it to tame it. And there's research now that shows, literally, when you name a negative emotion, your brain shifts a little bit, and you end up feeling better. So you do tame it. Just say it out loud.
True. That's true. Well, even for long, if I know, or because I kind of looked at my dark sides, I had read a book by Debbie Ford, who said you have to look at your dark sides and accept them. So what are some of mine? Mine are not that bad, but I don't think they're bad now. At that time I did, just different little things. I not only had to, I looked at them.
See, accept is an interesting word. I just want to say, accept And we sometimes think, oh my goodness, we have to accept it. We have to embrace it. Like
No,
it has
no,
to be
no
all
embrace.
or none.
I didn't
But
embrace.
it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be
yeah.
all or none. So we're talking about these simple things from going to surviving to thriving. So
Okay.
awareness, so even self-awareness.
That they're there.
I have a dark side.
Sure.
And to say it. It doesn't mean I'm a dark person or this is all of me, but it just says, you know what, I have a dark side.
But can you look at them and say, learn from that?
Absolutely.
I learned from
Totally.
what that is.
Totally.
You know, what was bossy at one time has actually turned out to be, because I was always a little bossy when I was a kid. That's a dark side. I always thought it was. But when I looked at it, I thought to myself, my gosh, that has helped me in so many ways.
Yeah, so it could be, bossy / capable. Bossy / organizing.
Yes.
It could be
yes.
persistent, stubborn / persistent.
Yes.
So
yes.
our little tilt, those optimizations.
I like that.
So going from surviving to thriving and self-awareness and these kinds of optimizations that we do with ourselves can make all the difference.
Oh, totally.
Yes. So
yes.
saying, well, this is a good occupation for you, Alena, than if you're bossy because you're organizing people, you're leading people.
Yes.
That's what you should do. So
yes,
that's how we can deal with ourselves.
Right.
And help our kids, for instance. You might,
Exactly.
I noticed the differences in my kids. And so you want to help people channel themselves into certain work lives or areas where they can use their strengths.
And they're happy.
Yes, and that's one of the tenets of positive psychology is to use your signature strengths and to develop them in a meaningful way so you can experience purposeful engagement in everyday life. And that's so important.
It's very important.
In one circumstance you might say, this person is bossy, but in another situation you might say, this person's a great leader.
Right.
This person's a great speaker. This person's so capable.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's one thing I've learned, that what seems so dark to people from history or from when they were children or whatever they deemed as their things that they don't like about themselves is actually by switching it and finding the good sides, they will know that was actually some of their strengths and some of the good things that have led them. And it just takes changing, or as I love your term, tilting them.
Yes.
And turning them into something that you can use.
Shifting, optimizing, tilting. Yes.
Yeah.
Just tip it over a little bit.
All right. Yeah. And then when we're also talking about, go ahead, you were going to say something.
And that builds on itself. Then positive emotion, positive experience builds on itself. And that's how you get into an upward spiral.
This is
Once
cool.
you get along that spectrum, if you're thriving, it's much easier to go from thriving to flourishing.
Right.
Because you're in that upward spiral and you build a momentum.
Yes, you do. That's it. It's getting to that. And that's where the introspection comes and building yourself up comes and changing and tilting and all that other good stuff.
Yes, and that momentum creates its own force. That vortex of force, and it propels you
and it
up.
propels you up.
It's very powerful.
It is very powerful.
Just as the downward spiral is very powerful too. And maybe we're more familiar with that. But both sides of that spiral, they're very powerful places to be.
They always say, and I don't know if it's so totally true, they always say that for people to accept new ways of thinking, they have to be where they have nothing, or they feel that they're at their bottom. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay, why is that?
I do, because I think your most significant changes come out of your deepest losses.
Okay.
When you hit rock bottom, when
Why?
There's nothing else, because then you're bound to the bedrock of your existence, and you get to build your foundation all over again.
Whether you like it or not.
You have to start over.
And then you start, and because of that, you start questioning why.
Absolutely.
And that's when things start to be revealed to you in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. It is very interesting. So all these little, and everybody has their own bottom.
Eckhart Tolle wrote about that in his book, The Power of Now.
Yes.
He wrote about that, and he also wrote that his experience was that your sense of spirituality grows out of a deep sense of loss.
It does.
And lots of other spiritualists have said the same thing.
Yes, it is very, very, very interesting. I love that concept. But it makes me wonder, what about the person who is on the search but hasn't had that deep loss? What about the person who is wanting to learn more? I am always amazed. There are people that actually are very young, and yet they're on this search for more. And are they trying to redefine everything in their mind? But what started them on it? What would start somebody who wasn't at a place where they had to question everything? What makes them tick to do that?
Well, young people are also on that path too, because they are, they too, in a sense, are starting from ground zero. You know, as a young person, it's the end of your adolescence, so you're mourning the loss of your family of origin. You're moving away. It's a point of individuation.
Another transition.
Another life transition. So that's the first time we see it in life. We're more familiar with midlife crises.
Right.
Okay.
Right,
Everyone knows
right.
that term, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, previously it was called adolescent rebellion, or, you know, so as you're coming out of those teenage years into your early adult years, things perhaps have shifted a little bit now because we live longer and, you know, that sort of thing. But basically, you know, when you leave your family of origin and you enter the world, you've got to really evaluate. You've got to say, okay, now all the things, the values, the beliefs that I got from my family of origin, you know, what is useful to me, what's not effective, what needs to be discarded. So for young people, that is a huge time.
Themselves.
Totally. And the leaving the family of origin represents their deep loss. That is a deep loss for a young adult.
Yeah,
that's their loss. It's invisible to the rest of the world, but for that young person who's 20 or 18 or 19 going off to university, and they have this sort of crisis of the self, that's exactly what that's about. You've got to really question your values, your philosophy, the things that give you meaning in life. Where are you going to go?
And I think that happens so many times.
So many times in life.
So many
at
times.
Different transition points. So
yeah,
I think that's what I understand about that.
And that's why transition points are growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. I want to talk about your book a little bit. Okay.
Sure.
Now, I know this book was written because of the aha moments you had, and I would like you to talk about, the process and why it came into being. You know, give a little more detail than I am about it.
Yeah. So my book, The Heart That Heals Itself, Discovering Emotional Riches Through Meditations and Reflections. I really wrote the book because it was part of my own healing process. As you know, my family and we faced a very deep loss when our home was destroyed in a gas explosion, and I barely escaped that day with my two youngest kids.
Well, now and then that is awful, but also you lost just everything. You lost your station in life. You lost everything that most people, when the house burns down, you know, they don't lose all the station in life and everything else. You really had a traumatic affair.
I did. I did, you know, some of my personal circumstances from my growing up years made my home extra important to me. It was obviously a place to live that gave me and my family shelter, but to me it also represented my life's achievement. I mean, I think it does that for a lot of people, not just me, but for a lot of people. And, you know, I had a beautiful house. I had a gorgeous house on a ravine. You know, it was the kind of house that you'd find in a magazine, and it would make your heart beat faster when you walked through the front door, and it was photographed by people. It was a beautiful, beautiful place to be.
Okay.
So what it represented,
right,
in other words, is what I'm saying, was also a loss, aside from the material loss.
Right.
Anyway, the book really was part of my own healing process, and so that's why I wrote the book. I started to write down my own thoughts, my feelings. I learned about meditation and mindfulness. I learned to meditate. So that's why I wrote the book. It was part of my healing journey. But the book isn't really about my journey. It's a book for readers to help them focus on their own journey and focus on the key and fundamental emotions in their lives. So things like love, connection, spirituality, and self-healing. So the book is something that I created for people to use in their daily lives to get themselves out of the basement, go above ground and into the sunlight. And each chapter is devoted to focusing on one of those powerful, fundamental emotions. Mm-hmm. I offer insights and meditations to help expand awareness and to help keep the reader, keep their heart open to developing more positive feelings.
In your book, you talk about connection and disconnection, and I'm taking that of oneself. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was one of the things when I read your book that kind of stuck out to me that I really liked, and I thought was important because it happens to so many people.
Yes, and I think, connection, keeping your heart open is key, because whether we get depressed or whether we develop an anxiety disorder or panic attacks or nightmares, those are all forms of disconnection from the self. We're slamming the door to the heart shut.
Yeah.
And so for me, I realized that was such a fundamental thing, is just to keep the crack, the door, just to keep it open, to keep it ajar constantly. Just to let those things of optimism, gratitude, nourishment, just to keep letting that flow, because it would have been so easy to just slam the door shut and become, something I didn't want to be.
Right.
Bitter and angry. And, in this case, it was because I'd lost my property. I had a long, lengthy battle with insurance and oil and gas companies. I had to learn about the law and all kinds of stuff. But again, we all have that in different forms in our lives in different ways.
That's true.
And so the key thing is to maintain your sense of connection to yourself and to other people.
To other people.
To
yes.
both.
Yes.
And that was another huge lesson I had, was because I was a proud person. And I was a successful person. I was self-made. I didn't need anybody,
Right, yeah.
And I was above all that. I was better than that.
Oh, boy,
okay?
yes.
So let's be honest.
I know.
So to learn to accept help from other people.
Yes.
Was such a...
Wow, what a lesson.
What an important lesson.
A very big lesson.
First of all, to allow myself to acknowledge that I was in need.
Yeah.
I was in deep, serious need.
Very serious.
For a lot of things. And to simply acknowledge that, again, that's how I learned about mindfulness, is to be able to tolerate myself. Because there was a point where I couldn't stand myself.
Sure.
So to be able to work with yourself and tolerate yourself and to say, yes, that'd be great. I could really use that. Thank you so much. Yes. I'd love it if you could do that for me.
Isn't that interesting?
But those were very hard things for me to do.
It's very hard for a lot of people.
I think it is for a lot of people.
It is.
And so just to be able to do that and then to say thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. But don't you find, because when I see people close off and they close into their world and just suffer there, and they do get bitter and they do get angry and just festered, or they get the anxiety that goes into depression and they stay there. They're the first ones that don't ask for help. But when they do, they open that crack, and it always kind of has to help. I always find that it has to happen with other people first before you do it to yourself, and I don't know why that is, but it does seem to happen that way. When you open yourself to other people and you take that lesson, it already starts to let incredibly so much light in. Just taking the help from other people. It's that connection. It's drawing the strength from them too. But it's also saying, yeah, there are other people out there that understand what I'm going through.
Totally.
And it suddenly takes that crack. It starts opening up this way.
Totally.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and then there's a synergy in that you realize we are, we're all the same.
Mm-hmm. So if anybody is going through any kind of crisis or any kind of trauma, or maybe it's a reoccurring trauma, really you've got to, even though it's hard, and it is hard, isn't it? I think it can be hard. You have to reach outside yourself to someone you trust or someone you love and say, hey, I need your advice. I need your help. I need you there.
Absolutely. Yes, reaching out to
Reaching
other people
out.
is so important.
It's very important.
And then accepting their assistance is very, very important.
Yeah. And then then it moves, and then it starts to spiral. You'll start
Yes.
to accept yourself, your situation, and move forward.
Yes.
Correct?
That's a wonderful way to put it. And it's one of those things that you can do to help you get into that upward spiral.
Yes.
Is to, it's one of those fundamental pieces that you can do.
Sure. Oh,
That's it.
Good. Very cool. Yeah, and now there's some other aspects of your book that I really loved, and I'm going to reach for my notes here because I wrote some stuff down. Do you mind if I talk about it a little bit? Okay. Will you talk about self-love a little bit? Because you talk about it in your book. I know it's one of my broad spectrum questions. But would you mind giving us a little bit of your idea about it?
Sure.
Okay.
So, it's such an elusive concept.
It is.
And, that was also one of my aha moments.
I know.
To realize, because really the truth is that my heart was badly broken through everything that happened. And it happened on Valentine's Day. It was just, it was one of those days where it was just an awful day. But I realized I wasn't really depressed. I wasn't traumatized per se, but my heart was broken.
You were grieving.
In so many ways, yes.
Yeah.
And it was shattering to me. And what I realized through all my own research and random reading and writing is that that's a fundamental thing that we all struggle with, is that fundamental wound to the heart.
Yes.
And that is the essence of self-love, is how do we put the pieces back together?
Yes.
Or how do we assemble the pieces? And
Yes.
that's where I loved, what Virginia Woolf said, arrange whatever pieces that come your way. So for me, for a long time after I had my loss of my property, I was really bent on rearranging. I was bent on making my life exactly the way it was before.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay.
So for a very long time, I wanted things to be exactly as they were before.
Right. That's very natural.
Well, it is. But except then I realized
it's not.
that, what? It's never going to be the same. And that was a point of deep transformation for me.
Yeah.
I knew Virginia Woolf's quote, and it was like, oh, now I understand what she meant when she wrote that. Arrange whatever pieces come your way.
Yes.
She didn't say, it's a puzzle, put them back together exactly as they were before.
Right.
She said, arrange whatever pieces come your way.
Right.
And so I understood that. Well, here I was left with the remnants of, from most of the world's standards. I haven't had an amazing life. I had a life that looked perfect to most people. And the pieces that I was left with were not that.
Remnants.
They were, they were different. They were different.
Okay.
And that too, I had to learn not to judge. Because I judged them myself terribly. And so the mindful awareness that here I am. She just called them pieces. She didn't call them remnants. She didn't call them rubbish.
Okay.
They were just pieces.
Okay.
And so I thought, there's my point of learning. And sometimes in life, here we are. We've got these things now. This is what I can hold in my hand. How am I going to arrange this now? That was a point of self-love for me, is how do we accept what is going on within the self, and how do we choose to organize the self around that? So again, back to the same thing, letting yourself experience whatever you're experiencing, understanding that there is a turbulence in our negative emotions. Underneath that is that place of peace, deep peace, of goodness, of purity, of knowing what is sacred within the self.
It's interesting you say that, because, when I went through...
Sacred and solid.
And solid. It is very solid.
Yes.
Well, and it's also I also found that.
And it's subtle too, and I would
It's
say
subtle.
that's the other thing I really want to emphasize. It's subtle, but it's sacred and it's solid.
And it's also big. I felt it big.
It is totally.
That's when I felt connected. That's when you get down there, you feel.
Dude, it's that mountain.
It's a mountain.
That deep base.
Yeah.
And I came to recognize that within. I should say it's been a journey of continually recognizing that.
Well, you do.
Yes, and that is where the self-love, where you come into that bedrock, the bedrock of the self, the self-regard, self-acceptance, self-nurturance, the self-compassion.
Right. When I was going through my little prison, or when I was going through my heart trouble, and I just learned this actually, as I was listening to Eckhart Tolle, and I was someone had sent me a link to one of his videos, and he was talking about the breathing and finding that place, okay? And I thought, I listened to him and I thought, oh my gosh. Because when things got so incredibly bad, where I didn't think I could deal with it, I say the car had its own life, but it took me to this one little mountain in Indiana that I just loved. And it wasn't really a mountain, a natural mountain totally, but it had a stone wall and it was an old monastery. And I used to go up there every time. It was 45 minutes out of town, and I would drive there. And I just sat there, and I listened to the hawk, and I would listen to the trees around me. And because I would find such peace there, then I would just find myself, and then I would go deep.
Yes.
It's what saved me. It was the strength. Finding myself was the strength that helped me get through all the other crap I had to go through.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story. And it just also emphasizes for me that the most sacred parts of ourselves often feel so remote.
They do.
They feel remote and far away from our everyday experience.
Especially when we're going through trouble.
And they feel either that they're not there, or they feel so far away.
You feel detached.
But they are there.
But they are.
They are there.
You have
and
to
that's
just
that
stop.
deep knowing and that deep faith
Finding
in oneself.
it. Yes, and you have to find it.
You do. You have to find it.
And then it'll give you all the strength in the world. It really will, to conquer everything. Yeah, that's what you found.
That's what I would say is self-love.
That's self-love. It is. It's the ultimate self-love.
It's not a place.
No.
It's a process.
It is.
Self-love it's a very active process. It's a journey. It's not just a little place to be, or it's an active process.
And it's always expanding.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's ongoing.
It's very ongoing. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, do you want to add anything else about your aha moment? And I think you have gone on to fantastic things. I think you've built even a better life, if you ask me. I think you are doing wonderful things with everything the pieces that you've been given.
Thank you so much. And I think that's the other thing too, is, Winston Churchill's quote, success. As often we feel like, well, I have nothing to show to the rest of the world.
Right.
So success is going from one obstacle to the next, and that in and of itself is successful. So whatever your life looks like from the outside, don't worry about it.
No.
Worry about your inner process. Worry about getting your feelings in order, your house of feelings, your sense of connectedness, your sense of spirituality. Just worry about getting that in order. And that may be an invisible process for a very long time to the outside world, but it will show. And that's what happens. The Greek philosopher Plutarch talked about that what we achieve in our inside life ultimately shows in the outside life.
Of course.
And now, of course, New Age thought leaders, that's all they say.
That's right. They do.
That is it. So it's not New Age. It's old, it's
very
ancient
old
teachings, but it's what Patanjali talked about. It's what Buddha talked about. And, it's a process, and it's important to not get overwhelmed or to feel like you don't have things to show in your outside life.
Impatient.
And to have that respect for your process, whatever it is that you're going through. And we're all going through something at any given time, whether we know it or not.
That's very true.
And to be respectful, to have that mindful awareness for the self, for that process.
That's exactly true. Oh, I do love that. You define self-love in such a wonderful way. So I'm glad that you brought that out and explored it. So, all right, now you also have a book coming out. And that is now you have the right title because I haven't seen it yet, but it's the cookbook, which is another way you used because it was a way of healing also, correct?
Yes, I've always loved food and cooking, and I think that the simplest things that we can do, again, simple, subtle, sacred, profound, I mean, that's where you're going to find answers, so to speak. If you're looking for things, there's no major thing that's going to come your way. It's in these very small, simple, sacred things that we do in everyday life, and eating is one of those. And that how you feed yourself represents your most primitive relationship to yourself. How you eat, what you eat, that reflects your most primitive relationship to the self. And there too, if you can bring mindful awareness to that process, it can be transformative. And of course food it's necessary.
Yes, it is.
And
yes, it is.
Make those necessities into luxurious experiences for yourself. So it could be,
a gift.
A gift. And like everything else, like just tolerating how you feel. If you're not feeling the greatest, just to really respect that. That's a gift you're giving to yourself.
It is a gift you're giving to yourself.
So anyway, the cookbook is called Cooking in the Heart of Italy, Recipes from My Kitchen in Villamina. And it's a cookbook that I've created with a dear friend of mine in Umbria, in Assisi, Italy. And we both share a passion for cooking. And these are her family recipes passed down throughout the ages that I wrote out for her, and we created a beautiful ebook together.
Oh, I can't wait to see it. I think it's going to be so cool. And I love Italian food, so I really will love it.
Yes, thank you.
Well, anyway, I want to thank you so much for being here and raising our awareness, and also just telling people it's all right, whatever they're going through, and just to open that door and reach out and find yourself. That's awesome. Anyway, I thank you all for listening. This has been a wonderful podcast. I hope you all have gained some insight and just make it a wonderful, awesome day. This is Conversations with Alena. Thank you so much. You can learn more about me by visiting alenachapman.com or follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.